The island of Sodor is known for its many railways, but there are several railways and stories related to them that have not been heard in a very long time. This is the story of one of those railways. It was known as the Snowall line. In the most northern part of Sodor lies a range of mountains. They are known as the Snowall Mountains because snow on the top of them, and that whenever you go on top of those mountains, it will always be very cold, and snow will be everywhere. This will be the site of one of the most forgotten incidents on Sodor. In the early days of Sodor, there was only the Sodor Mainland Railway that served this island. However, people were wondering if they could make a railway that ran across the mountain railway on the Snowall line. Between the Snowall mountain range lie the town of Snowall and the town of Reverin. Snowall and Reverin were about the same size. However, there was no way Reverin could be access to the outside world, and so they decided to build a railway that went from Snowall to Reverin via the mountain range on the Snowall. I'm sorry to say, however, that things didn't go according to plan. During the construction of the railway, they had to face very steep terrain and downhill grades. In all, 30 workers were killed during the construction of the railway that lasted until from 1901 to 1908. The line on the Snowall was a bit complex. It first started from Snowall, and then it followed a steep grade similar to Gordon's Hill. But as the grade kept continuing, it would get steeper and steeper. And then there would be a small level track, and then a much steeper grade, and then it will be a long way downhill to Reverin. It was very treacherous, and the owners at the time knew that they had to build an engine that would withstand these grades. And so, in 1906, they built a standard gauge locomotive that would be used to work on the line of Snowall. This engine was a very unique looking engine. He looked like a mix of the Furnished Railway K2 class locomotives. However, he had a taller funnel and had 4 driving wheels and 2 trailing wheels. He didn't have an actual number, but he was known as Rockwall Southern, but everyone called him South for short. South was painted in galaxy blue with a red tender that made him look like it was a cloak, which made everyone really enjoy him because he was such a unique and handsome looking engine. He was an extremely kind locomotive, and that would work for anyone, and was glad to be working on this line. He was built with very strong brakes, and was one of the strongest engines on Sodor at the time, if not the strongest engine at the time. Beginning in 1908, the Snowall line was put into service, and South would work his hardest by helping the trains up the hill. Other than this, he would also assist as a makeshift braking system for the trains going downhill, as they needed strong brakes, as the engines at the time didn't have very strong brakes to cope with the steep grade downhill. This, I'm sorry to say, will be South's downfall. Whenever a train went up the Snowall mountain range to Reverin or to Snowall, they had to be double-headed, or in some cases triple-headed, for it was too steep, and the trains would be too heavy for one engine to do the work alone. And South would just be there to push the engines up the hill and serve as a regular banking unit. At this point, he was very skilled at this, but many of the engines that went across the Snowall mountain range were unskilled and scared of being on this line, despite South's very kind nature. A small shed was built on a level track that led to much steeper grade, and this was where South would stay in before a train would rumble past him, and he would buffer up to it, be coupled onto it, and push it up the incline, and help the train downhill. And he would have no problems getting back up the hill back to his little shed. His crew were Bill Rogers and Dixon Norrick. They were one of the best known people in town, and would ski up the hill at times, while South just watched. To him, it was all fun and games, but there was still much work to be done, and he would always do it with a smile. That was until one sad April night in 1911. Due to the high range of the Snowall mountain range, there was frequent chances of snowstorms. The frequent storms often caused many troubles for the engines, as they couldn't see them very well. And due to this, South had 3 headlamps, 2 on his running board and 1 on his funnel. On April 15th, 1911, South and his crew was waiting at the small shed, where a small shack was, where the guard would sometimes stay at, for a train to pass. They had gotten news that a large freight train hauled by 3 locomotives would need help up the steep grade and downhill. South kindly said to his crew, "Well, looks like we got another train to catch," and his crew just smiled. During the time, night had fallen, and it was very thick with snow covering all over the place. A snowstorm had been broadcast earlier, and as they waited for the freight train, the wind howled. A headlamp was seen in the distance, and slowly the freight train came rumbling up the first incline. It was hauled by 3 locomotives. All were unnamed, but all had numbers too. The first engine, number 3, was painted red. The second engine, 39, was painted blue, and the third locomotive, number 60, was painted jet black. They were very young locomotives and didn't know the actual grade, and this was their first time up the hill. Behind them was a whopping train. The train consists of 3 tankers, 16 freight cars full of coal, and 60 hoppers. Hoppers were the short term for vans on that part of the line, and there were 2 brake vans on the back of the train. "Well, looks like this train needs more than just brake vans," said South as his crew jumped on board and steamed him up. As the train slowly passed him, South buffered up to the train and blew his whistle, and the large train set off for the incline up the hill. It would be the last time that ever the guard that lived in that shack would ever see South and his crew alive. The climb was not an easy one for the first 3 locomotives on the front of the train. It was very tough, and the engines were scared of being such a big height. "I can't see a thing," said number 3. "This snow squall is too much for me," said number 39. "Leave it to me," called South from behind, as he pushed the train up the hill. All the while, his fireman played a flute, that he sometimes play on the line when he and South were either going up the hill or going down it. In those days, the brakeman would have to ride across the cars to tie down the brakes, or the air brakes of the locomotive. However, there would be some cases where the train would have to use their own brakes to even stop on the first incline, just to make sure that things were safe. On the first stop, everything seemed fine, and the engines checked their brakes, and slowly they started back up the hill again. They were going at a good 20 miles per hour, but to the 3 locomotives, it seemed too slow. "We're gonna be late," they said. They weren't arrogant, they were just really nervous. South smiled. It was time that these youngsters would be taught a lesson about how to go up this hill, he thought, and he pushed the train up the hill with all of his might, blowing his whistle all the while. And then it came to the steep downhill grade that led into Reverin. As the long, heavy train began to go down the hill, South realized that he was starting to be dragged along, as the 3 locomotives were becoming very nervous and wanted to get back on schedule, but were too late to look down. "Take it easy up there," he called to them. The engines didn't respond. They really wanted to get back down the hill as soon as possible. They were going as fast as they could down the hill. The 2 brakemen in the 2 brake vans ran across the train, but they realized to their horror that the air hoses connecting the air brakes to the locomotives had frozen solid. There was no way that the trains would give down the air brakes, and so it would give all the South ever got to stop that train. He called to the engines another time. "Guys, slow down! The air hose is so frozen! We have to slow down!" The engines didn't pay attention to him, however. They just wanted to get back down the hill as soon as possible. "Hurry, hurry, hurry!" called engine number 3. Come on, we're almost there," said engine 39, even though they were halfway down the hill. By the time they crossed the bridge on the mountain, they had reached 70 miles per hour on a 35-mile-per-hour grade. South tried to call out to the engines, but they didn't respond. They were too scared. So, South took a deep breath and began hammering down his brakes as hard as he could, blowing his whistle all the while to stop the runaway train. At this point, the 3 locomotives also realized that they were out of control. Wait, what's going on? "What brakes?" called engine number 3. 60 and 39 were in response, but it was way too late to stop the runaway train. The train was now going down the hill at a reckless speed. South and his driver fought for control, but it was much too late. With close to 20 miles left to go down the mountain, the engine number 3 went off the curve and plunged into the gorge below, taking engine 39 and 60 with them, screaming out into the night. The truck soon followed, and the 2 brake fans too. South braked with all of his might, but the weight of the entire train was too much, and he himself flew down the mountainside. The train fell to the ground in a horrific explosion. The residents of Riverrun rushed to the scene of the disaster, but it was little that they could do. All 3 locomotives on the front of the train were killed instantly. Their crews were also killed. They didn't bother jumping off the train. The entire train was completely destroyed. The two guards in the vans were also killed. And then, South and his entire crew were also killed. Nothing was left that resembled an engine that was once South. He was just a hump of metal that was once one of the most powerful locomotives on the region. The fire went out after 20 minutes, but it was a horrific sight. The accident on that night has become known as the Great Snowall Wreck, but it has been since forgotten by those. The residents helped clear up the mess as much as they could, but the 3 locomotives and South were taken away to be scrapped, and the bodies, or whatever were left of them, were taken to Reverend Cemetery, where they were properly buried. The wind howled as their bodies went to their graves, and as the wind howled again, South's body was scrapped. Knowing how dangerous this line was, the owners of the Snowall line decided it was best to close the line, as it was considered much too dangerous for engines to be up there. And the 2 locomotives of South's class were never taken into proper use. These 2 locomotives, who were known as Slopier and Mountain, were taken to a museum piece, but now are working on the Peel Godred branch of the aluminium works. And as for the line, it was shut down. Riverrun is still there, but is now served by a port. Snowall never recovered from the accident that night, and has slowly dropped until residents of nearly 30. As for the line itself, this is when the hauntings really began. Around a week after the disaster, on one of the last trains to ever run the line, they reported seeing a headlight rushing at them at a dangerous speed, but just as the train was about to hit their own train, the train flew off the bridge. It was consisted of 3 locomotives, numbered 3, 39, and 60, and a locomotive resembling South. But when they went to the scene, nothing was there, and it continued night after night. A phantom freight train will be seen rumbling and thundering down the mountainside, whistles blowing in the wind to only have crashed or disappeared entirely. They say that if you walk on that old line at night, you'll hear a whistle echoing in the darkness, and a headlamp blares at you, and a freight train pulled by 3 locomotives will thunder right past you, followed by 2 brake fans, and south. That old shed where south was still stands, but no engine berths in it. And the Snowall mountain range is now the home to the spirits of those that were lost. And many people say that on that mountainside, they'll see the headlamp and a locomotive. The locomotive resembling south, climbing up and down that hill. But he is trapped there, never to leave that mountainside. He can't leave it until he completes his tasks. He has even tried to help trains up those hills, but after 3 more accidents on that hillside, it was considered that the railway was too dangerous and it was closed. But in each instance, a banker engine was seen falling off the bridge with them, but no wreckage was ever found of the 4th engine. And so, on that railway that has now long since been forgotten, South's ghost still runs that line, along with those that were killed with him on that dreadful 1911 night. And it's safe to say this, that if you see South, it's always best that when you see him, say thank you to him for what he did to try to stop the train, but he couldn't. And he'll give you a whistle response and will disappear into the night.